Thank you. All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to the November 1st meeting of the Committee to Review and Assess Zoning and Review the Town's Use of Regulatory Agreements. Start by reading the Mass General Law statement. This meeting is being recorded and will be rebroadcast on the Town of Barnstable's Government Access Channel in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 20. The chair must inquire whether anyone else is recording this meeting, and if so, to please make their presence known. No one there. This meeting will be replayed via Xfinity Channel 8 on high definition channel 1072. It may also be accessed via the Government Access Channel, live video, and demand archives on the Town of Barnstable website. We'll start with item number A, roll call. Cynthia?
Members of the committee, Catherine Ledeck.
Here.
Chair of Committee, Bob Schulte.
Here.
Ken Alsman.
Here.
Councilor Jeffrey Mendez.
Here.
Councilor John Crow.
Here.
Councilor Matthew Levesque. Councilor Kristen Turkelson.
Here.
Councilor Charlie Bloom.
Here.
Seth Entieni.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to read the purpose of the committee. We work with the town's planning and development staff to review and reassess recently adopted zoning changes, review the town's use of regulatory agreements, and make recommendations to the council. Just my usual introduction. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, both in person and via Zoom. We've had significant interest in the work of this committee from the public, and I want to thank everyone who has appeared before us, written in, or sent emails. I encourage you to continue doing so. Just a reminder, members of the public can provide their comments either in person, via Zoom, or by email. Email comments should be sent to Cynthia Lovell at cynthia.lovell@town.barnstable.ma.us. And please note in the subject line, ad hoc zoning committee comment. Cynthia will forward all email comments to each of the committee members. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Just another reminder, if you'd like to see the zoning enforcement compliance system demo, I'd encourage you to do so. Please contact Cynthia to schedule a time. It'd be nice if we could get 2 or 3 people at a time just to minimize the time we take up from Mr. Florence's staff. So if you haven't had a chance to do that, I encourage you to do that. Just a quick update. Last meeting I mentioned I had some discussions with President Penn and legal regarding the inclusion of zoning enforcement recommendations to the town council as part of our committee's charge. Just prior to this meeting, I received an email from President Penn. I haven't had a chance to really thoroughly review that and digest it, so I'm going to hold off for now making any further comments regarding that. I think with that, we'll move to public comment. Before we go to Zoom, we'll take any comments from people here today in person. Just a reminder, when we go to Zoom, following the closing of the comment period, the Zoom will be shut off, so there'll be no further access via Zoom. But again, all comments will be recorded and available after the fact. So with that, I'll ask if anybody in the room has any public comments. Mr. Schwab? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Eric Schwab, Hyannis. I just wanted to give you a quick update on the LCPC. There was a significant change in tone at the last meeting, and there was a movement towards protecting our single-family zoning. Apparently, the public comment came in very strongly in favor of preserving the current zoning in single-family neighborhoods. And that was evident in the comments of the 6 members who made quorum. Many of the pro-housing everywhere crew seem to have just not showed up. I don't know if that was an official boycott or whether they were protesting the decision to protect single-family housing. But it was a significant change in the posture of that committee. I just want to make you guys aware of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Looks like there is nobody else here in the room. Cynthia, do we have anybody on Zoom?
There is nobody on Zoom.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of comments. We received several letters from the public Just at the end of the period before our last meeting, as well as recently. Nothing in the packet today. They probably came in just before our last meeting. So they were just additional letters from the public expressing detailed issues they had had with zoning enforcement. Some of them were zoning, some might have been other types of enforcement. A number of those I was asked not to mention people's names in public. They were concerned with being identified, concerns with perhaps retribution for having their names mentioned. Additionally, this past 2 weeks, I received several personal phone calls from people, which led to a couple of meetings. A couple of calls were 45 minutes or more. One was a meeting with a couple that had serious issues for multiple years. It was a 2-hour visit. I just mentioned the length of time just to highlight the amount of frustration these residents have had in trying to get resolution on some of their enforcement issues from the town. So just to mention, I know in talking to some of the others that people have heard from citizens as well, comments, that experienced that. So just mentioning that as far as some of the comments that we've had. So with that, I'll ask if any of the committee members have a response to public comments or letters that have come in. Charlie.
Well, I like Ken's letter that he got to us today or yesterday, maybe.
Sorry.
I think I like everything in it, and it speaks to his experience. We have 2 people on this panel here who have great experience, and unfortunately, Ken is one of them, and Catherine is the other. Great experience in this area, and I just like it. I think that we could take this letter and include it in our recommendations, maybe in an edited way or a more, written for a purpose kind of thing, rather than just to communicate to us. But I like everything in it.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. I saw the July 22nd date. I think that we had gotten that before, but I think you resubmitted that, right, Ken? Is that?
I didn't.
Oh.
I don't know where it came from.
Oh, okay.
I was surprised to see it.
Oh, Cynthia, I think that was in our packet. Was that a letter that,
Yeah, it came to the top of my email again, so I thought he resent it.
Oh, okay.
For the purpose of discussing it.
oh, okay. Great, thank you. All right, we'll make a note of that, Charlie, as well. We'll put that
It's
together.
from July, rather.
Right,
But I think that it's a great letter.
okay. Ken might have put a reminder on there, so it came back up at the top of your email box, Cynthia. John?
Thanks, Chairman Schulte. I also like a lot of the ideas here, Ken, that I've seen before. I think we ought to be more proactive about what kind of development we want and direct developers towards that instead of waiting for, we have in the past for developers to come up with ideas for us to implement. So I do agree with that, and I think we should focus on that. I also wanted to say, I found it from Mr. Schwab's comment. I also was at that meeting the other day for the LCP, and I think it's a welcome that the LCP is starting to pay more attention to what the citizens are concerned about in our villages, and I think that's a good sign. And I expect when Jim comes up with some new language in January, we'll see a positive step towards having a resolution that I think the council can accept. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone? Yes, Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment to the citizens that are worried about enforcement of zoning regulations, so on and so forth, especially when it pertains to their private property, that I can speak for myself and a couple of the councilors from Hyannis is that we're very serious about it. And, as I mentioned before, I think enforcement should have its own department. We're not a town of 5,000 people anymore. We're a town of 50,000 people, over 100,000 in the summertime. So we need a mechanism of enforcement in this town, and it just can't be on building or whomever. It needs to be autonomous. It needs to have varying shifts, and it needs to happen quickly because people are losing their life savings, investing all into a home to have somebody move down 2 doors and have 17 people, 14 trucks in a front yard that's paved over. It's not fair to those people. It's not fair to the rest of the people in the town. So I just want those citizens to know that we are very, very serious about enforcement. And as I said, I can speak about the councils in Hyannis because those are the ones I have direct conversations with, and we're all very serious about it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. John?
I want to reiterate 100% what Jeff just said, Councilor Mendez. There's no question that we have a problem with enforcement in the town, and there's going to be one of our, my personal, and I know other councilors' personal efforts coming up in the next year is to fix that problem once and for all. So thank you, Jeff, for bringing that up and reminding the public.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Kathy?
I can't miss out on an opportunity, can I, Mr. Chair? I just want to thank all the members of the committee for being supportive of the questions that are coming in from fellow residents on enforcement. I take that very seriously. I'm not a counselor, so I'm not in a position to be able to affect the kind of change and improvement that you all can do. I really look forward to seeing all of that as it unfolds over the next 6 months or so. I think for us, we have an opportunity to help guide ways to improve the ordinance so that it's easier to enforce and it's more clear for those who are living here what's supposed to happen in certain areas of the town. So I think I look forward to writing things up so that we have good recommendations to move forward on that. But I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's been supportive of the need to improve enforcement. I think that's a really, really important issue for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other comments, we'll move to item D. Jim's chance to get up again. Discussion of proposed recommendations for the downtown Hyannis zoning districts. Jim and I met earlier this week. We talked about, and I think we identified them last meeting too, picking off maybe 3 topics that have come up before. We have several others we'll get into, but wanted to drill down a little bit more closely. He has the draft memo that he shared with us last time. I think you all have a copy of that in the package of information that Cynthia provided us. And we've talked about several of these things, and Jim highlighted them in the memo, and Jim and I talked about it. What we wanted to try and do is have the committee start talking about some more specifics that we can include as part of our recommendations. So we identified parking, building heights, and district boundaries as 3 that we would try and get through today if we can. I'll turn it over to Jim to lead the discussion, but, an example would be, and this is just an example, we might look at the building heights and say to the town council, we would recommend the town council review the zoning, downtown zoning, and recommend reducing building heights on Main Street from 4 to 3 stories with an 8-foot setback on the 3rd floor. I mean, that's just an example. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but that's the kind of thing that we want to get to, I think, in terms of making the recommendation, something with some specificity that the town council can look at and digest rather than just saying, look at building heights again. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. Jim Kupfer, Director of Planning. So as the chairman mentioned, building off of the original draft memo that was provided to the committee, the chairman and I sat down and discussed next steps and potential work product. So tonight I hope to talk about parking, building height, and district boundaries. And just quickly, I'll read in the memo how I begun to phrase each of those. So in parking, the committee suggested the parking ratios for residential dwelling units may need to be adjusted and studied further, as 1 space per unit may not be enough for the future development. So that's really, we were talking about the ratio of parking, and I'll get into what is allowed today, what was allowed, and get into a little more nuance. So hopefully we can pull the string a little further. Building heights, similarly, the committee suggested building heights may also need to be adjusted. The committee noted the zoning may want to consider a more nuanced approach to building height, considering abutting properties, roof lines, varying heights over linear feet, to reduce the likelihood of that canyon effect that we've heard concerns about over time along Main Street. And lastly, district boundaries. And what we mean by the district boundaries, we've heard time and time again recently about the outer parcels of the downtown Hyannis zoning and potentially kind of stepping that down. So reducing heights over time, over space, over geographic space, or reducing densities in the outer limits. And I'll touch on what specifically I mean by each of those. So it's important to note, again, we're talking about downtown Hyannis zoning district. So this is specifically only to downtown Hyannis. The zoning does not relate to anywhere else in town. So we're talking about, again, from the Airport Rotary to the Yarmouth Town Line, down to Nantucket Street off of Ocean and back over to the West End Rotary. We have 7 zoning districts within that. And as I mentioned some time ago now, the form-based districts, as we define it here at least, is the downtown Main Street and the downtown Village. So those are the ones where there's more permissive zoning. It allows for more density, allows for taller structures. It calls for buildings to come up to the property line. Whereas this hybrid zoning districts are more as you would think of a traditional zoning, the downtown neighborhood, which is a yellow, downtown hospital, which is essentially zoning for the hospital in the darkish blue, the transportation center, which is, again, just mostly the transportation center and some of the shuttle parking that's associated with things like the High Line and steamship and some other uses out in that teal color. And then highway commercial, kind of the bigger box retail along 28 there. So again, as mentioned, there are a number of different issues that the committee was certainly interested in discussing today. Hopefully we could discuss these 3 items: heights of buildings, parking ratio, district boundaries. Certainly the conversation doesn't have to end today, but thought we could get into a little more of the detail and hopefully start directing the conversation in a way in which the committee would like to move forward and provide recommendations. So height of building. So for the existing zoning today, the heights of building in the DMS and the DV, we look at the number of stories and varying heights per story. So the ground story, we talked about having different heights, the upper stories having different heights, and it all leads to the full height of a building, and those being potentially up to 4 stories if the 4th story does have that 8-foot setback. So how that looks practically in our zoning, we have dimensional standards in our zoning ordinance. We have it in table form for each one of the districts. This here is the downtown Main Street zoning district. So as you'll see there, number of stories, 3.5 or 4 maximum. And then those story heights, as I mentioned, commercial, there's a little bit of allowance for greater ceiling heights of commercial use, and residential is 10-foot minimum. Upper story heights, again, 10 foot. So we're talking about number of stories, essentially allowing up to 4 stories. There is that nuance of the 8-foot setback for the 4th story. And then previously, so the previous zoning had, as it's phrased there, the maximum height of the buildings or structures other than accessory rooftop equipment discussed below or special architectural features is 42 feet or 3 stories, not to exceed 46 feet. So really, we're talking 46 feet and 3 stories, which is clear, the clear demarcation. We're talking 4 stories now, 3 stories then. The heights of a 4-story structure, do want to give you an example. 201 Main Street, which is the old Cascade building, is 55 feet in height. So we're talking, the difference of about 9 feet is what we're talking about here, which kind of makes sense if we're talking about 1 more story. It's approximately that, probably a little bit more. So that's where we stand with the heights. I do want to note, so you all received the chart with all the permitted projects before us. I will note only 2 of those projects actually have proceeded with and have been approved for the 4 stories in height. those being just that 201 Main Street and 307. I think within the district, each location is a little bit different. And I think it's appropriate when this committee is talking about maybe the district boundaries, we do talk about maybe each of these districts should be a little bit different. Because downtown Main Street, as we know it, depending on where you are, has varied heights. 201 Main Street is right next to this property. This property is a 3.5-story structure. So this is an existing property with maybe a 4-foot setback. Might be a 0, somewhere between 0 and 4. I don't know exactly where the property line is. I would assume those tree beds are not within the public way. So we're saying maybe a 4-foot setback of this structure. Then it goes up 3.5 stories in height. So the neighboring parcel where 201 Main Street's going, the 4 stories, I think, I don't want to speak for the Historic Commission, but I think they certainly looked at that and said, what is the neighboring parcel? How does that relate in height? And so, this, for instance, is something that 4 stories maybe had made sense for at that location. That's not the same for all of Main Street. We all know Barbone, Puritans, et cetera, right down this way. This is, a more traditional two-story, kind of a taller 2-story, though, because these are commercial units. That first level is actually, in fact, probably close to 14 feet in height. So this is a little bit taller for the commercial side. And then you have your standard heights above it, and you actually have a little faux parapet on the top there, meaning the roof is actually a little bit below where that top brick is. So it is a little more nuanced as you go through all of the downtown Main Street area. And so right now it is 4 stories. Again, as we noted before, not every project has come forward and taken advantage of that 4-story. Actually, it's in the far minority as those who've taken advantage of that. We've seen a lot of 3, a lot of 2, a lot of just infill of what's existing. So that's where we stand today. Happy to build on that conversation a little bit more if you like, before we go on to any next topic.
Jeff, go ahead.
Quick question for you, Jim. As far as commercial space, having more room and more room on the 3rd floor, did you say?
No, on the first floor, commercial.
The first floor,
yeah.
commercial space. I think a lot of these buildings, I don't see the feasibility of commercial space because Main Street just isn't the shopping place it used to be. It's more of a walking place. I had a conversation with a constituent yesterday about this very subject. Couldn't we reduce the height of that first floor and just make it, for the ones that are going to be just totally residential, to make that center line to make the center line come down, the overall height of the building. And another thing, too, is that you kind of read my mind when you were talking about sections. Because what I think is that each section should have the same roof heights. That's what I believe would be the right thing to do. Instead of having, Puritan is this tall, the next building is, Puritan is, say, 40 feet for the sake of argument, the next building is 27 feet or 30 feet. I think we should try to get them as close to the roof lines as possible because it's the cleaner look. And do it by block. So maybe at the end of Main Street, you can't go up more than 2 floors, or whatever the old Guido's was, or the old movie theater. That's my thought process, but, just like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I will note, agree in terms of uses. So residential, we actually we have parsed that out. So if in fact they want to come in with all residential and not additional commercial, it is 10 feet, so you can reduce it to a shorter height. I will say, though, that between Barnstable Road, Ocean Street, and C Street, there is a requirement for commercial on that first floor. So from basically here to C Street, there is a requirement for first floor commercial. Otherwise, there's not a requirement technically for commercial on the first floor.
Do you see that as a hindrance as far as getting good development there?
I would say not for that stretch, no. That's kind of our our core Main Street. It's when we start talking about the edges is where I would be concerned about mandating commercial on the edges, because then you're going to get, uses you may not be excited about because they're trying to wedge in a use that, it just doesn't, we might have too much of, as you mentioned.
And I'm not underestimating the need for commercial space. I just think we have to do it wisely, and we have to be realistic in what we expect. Because we have the stuff going on at the OK Mart Plaza. Obviously, we have the mall. So that's going to be where most people's feet go to shop. Main Street just isn't thought of that way anymore. Main Street is bars and restaurants. And if you want to go for a walk with your husband, wife, girlfriend, or whatever on a Sunday afternoon, that's what Main Street is now. So we have to kind of be smart in the way we allocate the space for commercial space on Main Street, because there's nothing worse than having empty commercial spaces. My only thought.
Charlie?
Jim, I'm sure this is syncing with the design plan that the planning board and the downtown Hyannis district did. I'm sure it's syncing with that. But I'd like to bring up something that was said at the joint session a month ago or so. One of the fellows on the planning board suggested in his remarks that he said something to the effect that, maybe it's okay to have a 4-story building next to a 1-story building because the person who is owning the 4-story property wants to make the most out of it, and or something to that effect. And I just don't agree with that at all. I mean, we tell these developers how to do their windows, how to do their, we tell them everything, but we can't tell them how high they can build their buildings. I mean, I think we should be able to say that, and to suggest that 4 stories next to a 1-story thing on Main Street would be okay is it wouldn't look good. It would stick out like a sore thumb.
Thanks, Charlie.
I would expect you to
No, I can absolutely respond just a little bit to it. Yes, absolutely. And I think, I think the Historic Commission agrees with you in that regard. There was an application recently that was a 4-story next to a 1-story, and they said it just doesn't fit in with the character of the surrounding area, and asked for the applicant to come back with a shorter building. And with that, actually helped in our framework of the design guidelines that are ultimately haven't been approved yet, but they will be back before the joint group soon. That talks about just that over a linear feet of time, the movement of heights. We already talk about, as you mentioned, the movement of facade build-outs, bay windows, et cetera. But we don't have anything in terms of the relative movements of the heights of structures, and so we've added that into the design guidelines. Certainly something we can consider enhancing even further, because design guidelines are just that, guidelines, so they are waivable in terms of in front of the commission. But if we wanted to do something a little more nuanced in the zoning, we certainly can consider that.
The 201 Main Street, I have no problem with that. I know I like to keep it at 3, but that 3.5 is okay because it's not a big, massive, long structure. One of the original designs for the Hyannis Inn was just this massive, long structure. I mean, it just looks bad to me.
Understood.
Kristen, go ahead. Oh, okay, just a couple comments. One, Jeff, just a contrarian opinion, perhaps. I hear what you're saying, the heights. I think, and again, I'm not a design guy, but, I think one of the concerns with having everything the same height, then it gets to look too uniform, like it's cookie cutter. So I would say that might be an argument for having some maybe you don't want to have big swings and stuff.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I was thinking, we don't want everyone to be, because then it looks like it just came out of a mall or something like that. So, okay, gotcha. Jim, based on our conversations and what I've heard and watching some of the other meetings and things, if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding or perception is, well, first of all, we have some projects that have been applied for and permitted. So if it's a 4-story, we're not going to, the council or this committee isn't going to make any recommendations that's going to change that. But we can look at making recommendations to change the heights, which would impact future projects, okay?
Absolutely.
So one, there's an argument to be made that the sooner our recommendations get in, the sooner the council can act on those kind of things. You know, we don't want to rush through things, but, you know, if we can make recommendations, the council can take action on that. I'll put a stake in the ground to start the discussion, and Jim and I have talked about this, based on what he said he's seen. We've heard a lot of developers over the last several years saying, we need a 4-story project to make money. Well, the reality seems to be that's not the case. As Jim said, he's seen things that are 2-story and 3-story, and actually 4-story has been kind of in the minority. So I guess my thought would be, and this is subject to discussion here, I just toss out the idea, this would apply to future projects, not the ones that are permitted, that we reduce the building heights under the downtown zoning by a story. So if it's now 3.5 to 4, you know, the 4-story seems to have a lot of concerns and objections. I would suggest we think about making a recommendation to reduce that by 1. So whether that, I don't know how that works out, Jim, then does it say then 2.5 to 3 or just what? But I guess I'd toss that out as an idea. Jim, your thoughts, and then comments from any of the other committee members.
Yeah, I would say that if the committee wants to look at the reduction of building heights from 1 story, what I could certainly do at our next meeting is provide you with the full of the 7 districts and showing you what that would look like and whether you want to parse it out even further. My initial reaction is it's probably not going to be applicable to those non-form-based code districts. But let me show that to you and present it to you, and we'll see if that's how you wish to proceed with it.
And I was even thinking more specifically to Main Street, but yeah, maybe you look at it in a couple of different scenarios. But like I said, I'm just tossing that out. I would love and would appreciate thoughts, comments if people think that's way off base or, you know, so.
I'll respond to that. It's one thing if you have an opinion, a taste that you do not like 4 stories. However, I strongly believe that there are architects and designers that could convince you otherwise to make a 4-story building work around 1-story buildings. If your concern is more so, oh, it blocks light, sunlight, and other aspects that would affect someone's quality of life, I can understand that. But from a purely aesthetic perspective, there are very talented people that could convince you otherwise. And on top of that, it's what about that the use of that extra floor? Could it house more people? Could it be used for public space underneath? Could it be used for a commercial space or otherwise, or a workspace? I think we should at least leave that door open for future development. It doesn't oblige people to go up the 4 stories. It just leaves that freedom open to the designer and developer.
Okay, appreciate the comments. Others? Kristen?
No, Kathy's had her hand up.
Oh, okay,
I'm happy to speak.
Kathy, go ahead, sorry.
I've just been fiddling with my pen, actually. No, just kidding. If we're just talking about Main Street Hyannis, and would you mind putting those pictures back up of the brick buildings? Sure. That one right there. There's some things here that are missing for me. There are no street trees here, for one. There's no landscaping in the front of these buildings at all. I mean, we know that the urban heat island effect here, when you walk down that street on a hot summer day, it is so hot. As much as you want to take a walk on a Sunday afternoon, Mr. Mendez, I'm just going to say you're not going to go there because it's just too stinking hot. There's no shade. There's also nowhere to sit. So what's missing for me is any kind of discussion about what the public realm should have and some kind of coordinated plan for the public realm. The public realm is basically the street and the sidewalk. Is it just going to be a street and a sidewalk with no street trees? I got to tell you, I'm not going to go there. It's going to be too hot. It's too boring. And these buildings that we're looking at right here, so those are 2 stories. Imagine this 4 stories. I think this is boring as all get out because there's no variability in the facade. There's no landscaping. There's no place to sit. This is not really what I would want in my imagination for all of Main Street. Now, maybe there are some sections of Main Street where we have already street trees in place, places to sit, so that when people are walking and they stop by, I don't know, the ice cream store or the bookstore, there's some place to sit. But I'm just not seeing this as a really comfortable and welcoming look. And I have some ideas from other places where I've been that show nice designs for what a plan for the public realm could look like. So I'd like to bring that in and share that with the rest of the committee so you can get a better sense for what I'm talking about. I'm happy to share that. With respect to the height of the buildings, I think that there may be some places where 4 stories might be appropriate, depending on what's around it. I don't think that 4 stories is appropriate on the edge of a zoning district where there's a drop down from, say, 4 stories to 1 story. I appreciate, Seth, your suggestion that there are good architects out there that can design that. I haven't seen any of that coming to us. And maybe Ken's comment about us being more proactive is really important here. We need to go out and find somebody who can come up with something that's going to be interesting and attractive and would want us to live there and or take walks in the summertime there. But I haven't seen that. I'm very interested, especially in the outer boundaries of these zoning districts. I used to live on the boundary of a zoning district, in between zoning districts, and those properties along the edges have a tendency to be sort of, nobody's really paying attention to what's going on there. So the difference between one zoning district and the next can have a really big impact on an area where the zoning is lower and less, and maybe 4 stories isn't right, but maybe graduating the heights up to 3.5 stories would be okay. I don't know that because I have to see what the designs look like that are coming in. So I think it's really important to get some sense of what's supposed to happen in the public realm because I'm not seeing it. And along Main Street, that's great, but off of Main Street, the public realm is even more important because that's where people are living. There's no landscaping there. There's no trees. You know that big parking lot behind part of Main Street there on North Street? You'll see nobody there in the summer. There's no street trees. It's stinking hot back there. Nobody wants to go there. Is that what we want? I don't think so. It's not what I would want because when I go into downtown Hyannis, I go to certain places because I know it's comfortable for me to hang out and enjoy the ambiance, go out to dinner with my husband or something like that. And those are places that have all those features. It's not just an empty parking lot, which seems really boring to me. I'd like it to be more interesting, and I think there are ways that we can do that by having a good plan for the public realm. I think that's really important. I think the boundary areas are important. We should really look at that. You know, Jim, one of the things that I was thinking about the other day is it would be really great to see the site plans for some of these projects that have been approved recently so that we can really have a discussion about something that's really happening and have a look at it. It's not intended to be critical of what's already been approved, but we can look at it and see what we like about it, maybe what we would like to see different, or perhaps we just like it and it's exactly the way we want it to be. But maybe there are improvements that can be made if we were to look at, I can think of a few off the top of my head, but maybe we can talk about it, Mr. Chair, later to decide which projects we could look at. I think it would be really useful to look at real projects that have come through as a result of this zoning, the way it is right now. Then we'll know whether it's working or not. Just my ideas. I'm sure I'll have more.
Kathy, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
On that picture of Main Street with the brick buildings there, on that one right there, it seems like you have some hope that something can be done to make this place a more welcoming, cooler, place for people to be, sit, walk. And I'd really like to hear all that information that you want to present. Do you think an environment like that requires more of a setback than what we have here, if it's to be done right? Or are we kind of handcuffed a bit with this limited space here?
I think on Main Street, we may be limited with respect to how much space is available to us. But what's missing in that picture, in front of the building with the red and white awnings, why isn't there a street tree there? That's a simple solution that can make it a little bit more shaded and comfortable in the summer, providing people with an opportunity to walk up and down the street. That would be a simple solution in this particular example. But I think the challenge is it has to be coordinated all up and down the street, because otherwise, if you don't have a coordinated plan for the public realm, it's going to look so haphazard, it's not going to look well-planned. I think the buildings should have something different. Each one of them should look different in some way. If you look at the other picture of the buildings, the one with the siding, yeah. I mean, that's got some architectural interest to it. It's not just a flat facade. You know, you have the step back at the top. I don't know if there's a balcony up there where people can hang out and spend time outside. If that's in fact true, that'd be really awesome. But those are the kinds of features in a building that you can provide that would make it more interesting. And it's not just a square building on a lot. On Main Street, you have 0 property boundary setback requirement, isn't that right?
Correct, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's
like that.
possible, I think it's possible that behind these buildings, the streets behind these buildings should have enough space on their lots for street trees in the front. I don't know that.
I hate to interrupt. I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but I'm not sure if it's form-based or what code it is, but all this stuff is already under consideration. All the trees, parking lots, planted trees along Main Street, that's all in the form-based code. So I understand what you're saying, but that's something that's already in the works. The town is in the works of planting trees and doing all that type of stuff. So, yeah, I just wanted to point that out before we go too far down that rabbit hole, that's all.
Go ahead.
Kristen, do you have some comment? Joe, Kathy? All right, okay. Kristen, go ahead.
The requirement of the heights.
Yep.
Just because I'm not a builder, 10-foot minimum. Does that mean the interior height is 10 feet? Like
Correct.
my
Ceiling.
bedroom would be 10 feet
Yep,
tall?
exactly right.
I've built a house and I really debated about the ceiling height. And honestly, I wouldn't want to live in a house with 10-foot ceilings. I think once you actually inhabit the space, I mean, maybe if you're as tall as Mr. Schwab, you'd want to, but us short folk, I think 10 feet's actually quite tall. I mean, we talk about, I mean, I don't know enough about energy efficiency, but, as far as keeping things cool and warm and that kind of stuff, I'm just wondering if it's something also that, I don't know why we're building 10-foot high ceilings. I don't know what you said in 201 Main, the Cascade, it was 55 feet total versus, I guess it was 9 feet was the old height.
46 as it's shown there. So the
You said
9
that
is the
two-
delta.
You said the 201 Main Street, you said was 55 feet
Right.
height.
46 here, so the 9 foot is the difference between the two.
So I'm just wondering, why are we increasing the ceiling heights to 10? Like, where did that come out of, that?
That's standard
Is it just
building
we're America,
practice.
we want bigger, everything has to be bigger and
Pretty s-
better?
Yeah, no, it's pretty standard. I mean, you go maybe to 9 feet these days, perhaps. But this 10 is your standard, you typically build to. And that doesn't mean, I mean, I don't know your situation, but that doesn't include like the drop ceiling tiles we're talking about here. So you have a ceiling height that's slightly taller than what you see right here. There's a joist, there's beams above it. So, 10, you're not just running a tape measure from floor
I
to.
guess that's what I'm asking you, is what is the actual, once it's built out, what is the interior floor to ceiling height?
It's gonna vary for every developer, but that is the minimum. You could certainly adjust it if you so chose. It's again the minimum, so a builder could build to the standard height if he wanted to.
Yeah, I just was trying to get a sense of, when you have this as the form, what is the end result inside for the end user? What would that look like on the inside? And I'm just wondering if it means that inside your bedroom is 10 feet tall and, I just am curious. Obviously, I'm not a builder, so I don't know these things, but Jeff knows.
What I believe it is, I'm not a builder either, but what I believe, what I believe it is, if it's in the rough, it's 10 feet from the plywood that's gonna, your carpet or tile's gonna go over, to the floor of the apartment above. So it's not the joist, it's the floor. That gives you the 10 feet. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I
The
think
beam that's below that,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think
so
that's-
exactly right.
I think that's right, like in our two-story colonial, when I'm physically in there, I can touch the ceiling 7.5, but that's probably a 10-foot build, right? Because it's the floor above us. So my house would be 2 stories, 20 feet.
Right.
But the ceilings aren't 10 feet inside. That's not the dimension. So
And again, it would just
sounds really
vary.
big, but I think that's,
there'll probably be 8 feet ceilings right around there, once it's said and done.
Yeah, okay. I just was thinking a 10-foot, if you live in a 10-foot bedroom, everybody wants everything bigger, but I don't really think a 10-foot bedroom is really what you want. So I had some other questions, but I've gotten sidetracked and I can't remember them, so maybe they'll come back.
I just want to go back to Kathy's comments real quick. Jim, maybe we can add that as we go through some of these other areas, that the idea of relating the public space to because that came up before, and I know there's certain things we can and can't do. For example, I know there's been one project that's been through several iterations, and I know that they talked about doing some landscaping that addressed exactly the kind of things you're talking about, Kathy. I think that's still kind of, at least on one side of the building anyways, I think that's still in the works and stuff, but there was some thought to doing that in that particular proposal. But I like that idea, but maybe we talk about that, because that could be an addition we recommend to a change to the form-based code. It may not be in there now per se, but it could be something we ask the council to take a look at and think about, so.
So there certainly is landscape requirements on private property. We don't dive into the public realm for applicants that are submitting, obviously, because we own the public realm. So it would be on us, though we do some from time to time seek mitigation that, if someone was to clear cut all the way to, it was a wooded lot, maybe we talk to them about, street trees or something to that effect. But there's nothing mandated in the form-based code for the public realm. Certainly something we could think about.
Because I'm guessing that tree right in front there would probably be, if the cupcake place would probably be on town-owned property. And Jeff, I'm not aware of what's going on, if there is a plan to put trees in, but that's, that may be something separate and stuff. But anyways, I'm sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
I just think that what's going on in the public realm has to be coordinated with the planning for those private properties.
Yep.
Because otherwise, we're going to go through the process, I'm just making this up because I don't really know, but we're going to go through the process of planting a nice shade tree in front of that building. It changes ownership, they want to redesign the front of it, and now all of a sudden, the front door is coming right out in the middle of this big tree, and that's not going to work out. Bummer, you got to take it down, you plant another small one. It just needs to be coordinated. That's the challenge that I see. And maybe nobody's going to change the facade of their buildings. I don't think that's true. I think some properties will probably change the facade of their buildings to be more interesting. I sure hope so. If any of them are listening, I hope they will. I just want it to be more interesting. That's all. And it needs to be coordinated.
Kristen?
And I also want to just echo what Jeff said, because I think I said it last meeting or the meeting before that I think if the you know, if we were to stick with the 3.5 to 4 feet or 4 stories, and the bottom floor isn't going to be commercial, I think that I get the whole varying of the look of it, so maybe that's a reason to do it, but if we're really concerned with height, maybe there's some other way to make it look appealing by making that first floor 10 feet instead of 4 feet. And maybe we're just splitting hairs and it doesn't really matter in the end, but, you know, kind of seems like then you have this one story that's 14 feet and there's residents on that floor and then the other ones are different heights. It just seems like even a little weird to me thinking about renting in a space like that, but, you know, just food for thought. I agree with Jeff's concepts.
John, did you have some first? Do we have, oh. Yeah.
Real quick, Seth said something earlier, which I agree with. I'm not sure about the stories yet on both sides, but I want to hear that. But we need some decent designs. What you see in that brick building is not well designed. It could be the same setback, it could be everything else, but it needs some kind of architectural flourishes that actually are interesting to the public instead of blank walls, and that's what I see in some of these programs. I think it's important that we request or ask for some out-of-the-box designs. I'm not talking about crazy stuff. I'm just talking about facade of improvements that look different between buildings, give a variety for the people walking down the street. I agree trees should be on each one of those things. I don't think anybody's going to bring their facade out towards a tree because we have a setback already. It won't be in the setback. So, and I know when I go through cities, the most desirable places, whether in Boston or New York or Barcelona or whatever, are the ones that are really treed. Okay, people like those streets. Okay, it brings down the whole brings down the heights of the buildings to a human scale, and I think that's important. So I think we're already doing that. That's fine, but I'd like to see some real good designs and request them from developers. Just don't give us the same old box.
Jeff and then Ken.
Also, just for context, we have to remember when Main Street became the Main Street it is now. It wasn't always that way. When South Street became the South Street it is now. These streets used to be two-way streets. But I forgot who, there was a gentleman where I was watching. I might have been one of the Great Street things. We do have so many, I forgot what it was. But he was talking about the craze at the time, I believe it was the late 60s, early 70s, was to create these big thoroughfares. One way this way, and Ken can probably speak to it, one way that way. But don't forget, we're changing all that stuff. This is all, so just by changing it to two-way, it's going to change the look of the street. And then there comes the Great Street stuff and all that. So we just have to kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about all this stuff, that it's going to kind of be the same, but it's going to be different in the same breath. So, you know, I just want to remind everybody about the other things that are going on with Main Street as we're discussing all this stuff. That's all.
Ken.
Excuse me, I've really enjoyed being on this committee, but I knew we'd get to something that was really fun to talk about. There's really nothing like urban design and all the things that you've been talking about and the streetscape. They are part and parcel of the same thing. I'm also not someone who's really concerned about height. I think it ends up being the character of the building in which that height is part of. Clearly on Main Street, you need a commercial 14 feet. Otherwise, you're not going to get commercial, and you're going to get something that's very cramped, unless somebody's got a really great idea of how to make a shorter building really work for them. And you can allow that. It's not disallowed. I think that the idea, when you look at the two pictures that we've seen of the buildings along there, the gray one and then the block, I think the gray one is very interesting if you look at the building. But on the street itself, there are trees there, but it doesn't look like there's much space for people. So on the other hand, that long, I don't know if it's all brick or not, but I mean, it's pretty boring, that single height. And I think the idea of having variations in height there would add a lot to the character of the street and the interest of the street. And then when you add the trees in, then anyway, as you said, Jeff, it's a totally different, you're going to get a totally different feel. I don't know if the street plan includes using portions of the street for any landscaping or seating areas or any of those sorts of things.
So the street plan itself does not, the Great Streets, the two-way Main Street, does not go onto the curb. So we've focused from curb to curb. However, we are enhancing that plan with some ADA accessibility. And also we have separate program called Greening Hyannis, which is going to be looking at additional street trees. And we're hoping to get another phase where we can identify in commercial areas to do exactly what we're talking about here. But we all agree, trees on Main Street. That's how it used to be. That's you see any image of Main Street, Hyannis had beautiful trees, and over time, they've either died or been taken down. So certainly, bringing that greening back to Hyannis is definitely a priority.
Well, okay, so looking at that, a couple of thoughts occurred to me. One, you mentioned about changing the facades. A program that I've seen work before is something called, maybe the BID could do it, or somebody else could put into a program, would be a facade improvement program, where there are minor grants given to people who want to actually make some changes in their building. I'm not all that excited about giving public money away for private improvements, but if there's an incentive that might work in some way, that might be considered. Or even discussed with the BID is, okay, maybe this is something they can pick up over the next couple years as these other improvements are taking place. It's a natural time for it to take place. I also was thinking that it's really nice talking about this while we're sitting up here at the podium, but it might be a good idea to take a tour. And somewhere along the line, but I probably missed the good weather to suggest that, but I think being on the street and talking about it there might be helpful to us as we go through this urban design thing. I don't think we're going to get it resolved today. I do think it's something that it's a fairly long-term subject. Let's see, what else have I noted here? The whole idea of some sort of incentives to the property owners, either in terms of what they are doing or aren't doing when they're doing a new development. The idea of having them help in the public realm as well. I mean, in planting trees, or how do you make this whole thing work, would be a valuable idea. Or when a submittal is made to do something, if there's sort of a conceptual shadow of what's going to happen adjacent to it. Is that something, maybe there's a plaza that gets created that makes a taller building work better. There's a architectural element or a funny kind of gargoyle or something that is sticking out of the top that adds some interest and excitement, a public art, if you will. A gargoyle is public art, right. Anyway, those are the kinds of things that he has the pleasure of sitting down with these guys and talking about this and trying to excite them to do something more than they would normally do when they were trying to get something through a bureaucracy. That how do you get some excitement, your family get excited in working with us and doing this. And it sounds strange, but I actually think it works with people who have been in the business for a while and they want to be part of something. Additional photographs of where we think change might take place, if we can't take a field trip in particular, but we expect some change here. The idea of seeing the site plans is, I think, a very valuable tool that would be helpful for me to understand what is actually going on. I have not devoted perhaps the time that I should to actually looking at what is on the table at the moment, and that's something I'll bother Jim about. Just sort of throwing out a bunch of ideas, but as everybody else has. So,
Jeff, go ahead.
Just one quick thing, Bob. Jim, can you go back to the white building? This one here. And I'm sure Charlie Bloom remembers this. This building wasn't like this before. A lot of this was changed in the 80s. And now go back to the red building, the brick building. That building's always been like that. Okay, so when we discuss these things, I don't like it, but I love it. Because that's my town. That's always been that way, and I don't want to see that changed. I don't want to see that facade changed. Can we play around with the sidewalks and all that? Absolutely. But that is classic Hyannis. And if you notice, when you go through Hyannis, every block is something different. You have the corner, which is probably the first corner that was built on. What's the gentleman's name, the developer? He has the thing on the corner. Yeah. The Sunnyside Restaurant and all that stuff, the architecture there is totally different than it is in the middle. Then you have the main street after where the old bank was at the intersection where I call it Howard Johnson store, but Fresh Catches. All that, a lot of that stuff was remodeled in the 60s because it has that shanty, shacky type, hippie, San Francisco type look to it. The stores do. And then you get down past to where Jewel Craft and stuff is, a lot of that stuff was built and remodeled in the 70s. That's why it has the Woolworth big windows and all that stuff in it. So we can improve it, but we also have to preserve what's there because that's what makes Main Street unique, is that you can start at one end from 1920 and end up at the other end in 1975. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So when we're talking about changing facades and all this, that's all fine. But we have to also preserve what's there now. You know? That's just my thought.
I just make a quick comment. Jeff, you probably never thought I'd say this, but you read my mind. I was thinking the same thing, that we have to balance. There's a lot of things we're balancing here. The historic preservation. I mean, we may not personally like some of these things, but I can tell you the historic Main Street's going to say, no, you're not tearing down Puritan, you know. We have to look at that. I agree with you that we need to think about how do we make it more attractive with trees or some of the streetscapes. But we also don't want to encourage, I mean, one of the concerns I think a lot of people have is with the form-based zoning is it's encouraging people to tear down everything we have and build something new. I think what we really want to do is make recommendations that will direct them to develop in the new development what we want to see, but we're not talking about coming in and making a wholesale change to Main Street. I mean, we've got to balance that preservation of the historic, the maritime look, what's been here. We may all disagree as to what we like or don't like about a particular building, but I don't think what we want to do is come in here and encourage four-story buildings to replace everything that's on Main Street. That's my personal opinion, so I guess I would just share that, so. Kristen?
I'm going to agree with Jeff again. I do believe that this picture is outdated, correct?
Yes, it's the brick where Barbone is.
So the gray is now all brick, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to disagree with Kathy. I love this building. This is like, when I think of like Main Street, part of what I think of are these brick buildings. And now that the facade has been redone, because we have a facade improvement program, and that gray is now brick, it's actually, I think it's even more attractive and more indicative of the style that it was built in, and it feels, I don't want to say ancient, but it feels more period. So I really love that. That other building in the other picture, I've always hated that building. Every time I drive by it, I'm like, what an ugly building that is. You know, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like Kathy loves it, I don't like it, she doesn't like this, and I love that. So, I mean, that's part of the problem with Main Street. And the beauty of Main Street is that it is so diverse. Like you say, each block changes, and, you know, you go one door on either side, and it can be vastly different. So, and when do we think that 201 Main and 307 Main will be completed?
201 Main Street is actively working. I can't comment on 307, I don't know. But 201 is actively working right now. They're, I believe, hoping to pour foundations before the weather turns.
And I would never want to discourage development and growth and revitalization of this area, so I guess I'm saying what I'm saying with a little bit of like, I don't really know that I want to say this out loud, but we, part of what we've talked about as a group is we have these two projects that will be bigger, and we have them, we can't claw them back, there's no changing them, and we really don't have an idea as a community about what those are going to look like. I mean, maybe they're going to be built and we're going to say, that was the best thing we ever did, and the 4 stories isn't a big deal. We have, let's just say, 307 Main isn't going to be here for 5 years, and 201 Main is going to be done in 2 years. We really have this kind of waiting period. We're in the space in between where we've made a change to our zoning. We don't really have a feel for the impact, and we do want to encourage growth. So I don't know if there's a way to like reduce the height back to where it was, and then maybe there's a provisional piece where we can say, in the next 5 years, we will look at each project if a developer comes forward, as opposed to making it by right. So it's more of like, we're kind of getting a sense of how things are rolling down the road, and maybe there's a project that's in some place in this, area that we get behind because they bring forward 4 stories and it fits next to the building to the left and the right of it, and we're all like, that's a go, we should do that. And I just don't want to stifle something that could be really good, but on the same hand, once it's done, it cannot be undone. And I think that's the part for me is like, if we go with Bob's suggestion and we bring it back, I mean, maybe there's a provisional time period, or maybe we just want to bring it back and then, future councils will bring it forward again and we'll say, that was a dumb idea, and now we want to open up to 4 stories again. So that seems a little bit like I'm not being very concrete, but I'm just thinking there might be a place in between where we can kind of have a process where we look at it kind of project by project as opposed to by right. And maybe that's how, no, it wasn't always that way, but yeah.
Ken, go ahead.
I think that's really important. This is a long-haul project. Just talking about Main Street, I mean, it's, at least a decade, probably longer than that. I know that most small communities this is a small community, it just evolves over time. And as interest grows, you'll get different viewpoints. This group will be formulated in another 5 years, and you'll have another group of people with ideas. It's just part of this wonderful process that we put ourselves in.
I guess Kristen's comments, you kind of brought it back to, I think, bringing it back to the building height per se, not that we're going to make a decision today, obviously. But I want to think of some of the comments, where you made, Jeff, too, as far as Hyannis, and, we're pretty full. You don't want to see any more big housing. That would be one argument for wanting to bring the heights back down to prevent that kind of thing from happening. I agree with you, Kristen, that, in the future, they may want to bring it back up at this point. But if we just leave it at what it is now, and I think we've heard a lot of concerns, and I think we had a lot of comments at some of the last couple of meetings from citizens pointing out that, have we really taken into consideration things like, do we have the water? Do we have, the police and fire to support, a lot more housing at 4 stories? And maybe the prudent decision is to scale it back. We can always go back, and some future group, like you pointed out, Ken, can make a change as well. But I guess that would be my thoughts on, maybe stepping it down for future. We already know we have some that's permitted. We're not going to change that based on what, Jim has said about kind of attracting the economic development we hope to. We've pretty much already done that with these first approved projects. If we don't make any changes, then we could keep getting more and more, bigger and bigger, and create some of those issues. So just, again, food for thought as we go into that. I'm not going to make a decision today. I like your suggestion, Jim, of maybe taking a look at the next one, if you could kind of do kind of an analysis of what it might look like, scaling it down. And I think part of that discussion, Kathy, in one of the next topics was beginning to graduate that as the buffer zones. We don't want to have situations where we have 4-story buildings with 0 setbacks right at the edge of one zone next to a residential. So there needs to, and Jim and I have talked about that, and it sounds like that was already being discussed, looking at that. So maybe it's 3.5 or whatever on Main Street, and by the time you get to the end of that zone, it becomes 2.5 or something, so you don't have, this whole, district that's all 4-story or whatever it ends up being, so that might help inform, the next round of discussions on building heights, toss that out to people to think about. John?
One design element, I would think would help with the flat facade type of thing is, when you, like, for example, the building with the pink, right out here, whatever that is, the coffee shop. Not saying, we all like that, let's say we don't do it, but a new building that comes in would say have another story. What about making this line at 10 feet come out that has a deck that runs the whole building with a wrought iron right in front, and then, but it doesn't split up on each particular unit, so the whole deck would be like that, and people could separate it by plants. But they would put in plants there and hanging plants on that in front of their, which would bring the green more into that kind of facade. It would humanize it. And I've seen it in buildings before, that would come out like 5 feet, and it would be up on the second level, at the end of the first level, and you'd have people can walk out of their apartments above, and then above there's another story. Well, you of course wouldn't have that, but you'd have that in the first story or the second story. And I think that people would decorate their places to look nice. I've seen it all happen all over the place, that these are nice buildings, they want to keep them nice, and that would also add to the greenery and also bring the level back down to human level. So that's one thing I'd like to see, or maybe tried or suggested to developers, where they could bring it closer. You got to have the first story at the step back, but the second story can come into the setback by a long rail deck that looks nice, and it isn't separated per each unit. It just goes the whole length of the building. And then I think that encourage people who own those buildings to spend time outside in the summertime and make it, put greenery and that kind of stuff, and I think it would humanize the space, even though we have a flat facade, you know what I mean? It wouldn't look like a flat facade.
Charlie?
I beg the pardon of the committee. I think I need to correct something I said earlier. Jim, the white building that Jeff referred to, yeah. When I saw this thing, I saw that it's 201 Main Street. So when I said earlier that the height of 201, I was referring to this building, not to. To tell you the truth, I think of the project next door as the Cascade project. I don't even know what address it is, So this is the building that I see, that I said I don't mind the height of this building because of the setback on the top. There's only 3 windows in the front. It's not that bad a situation.
201 might be, I assume we have plans for those and stuff. That might be a good one, when Kathy suggested taking a look at something that's been proposed and permitted. That would help us see kind of a sample of what is something that's going up. That way we'd all get a better feel. Charlie, I don't know what that's going to look like at all. I mean, I did watch and see some of the plans for the old TD Bank. Which one is that? 301, 307? 307, but I don't know anything about what the 201 looks like. But, maybe those are 2 that we could look at that, give us a kind of sense, for what has been permitted so far to help educate our decisions on what we want to do for future ones. So, go ahead, Jeff.
One quick thing, I'm actually agreeing with you, because if we can get some renderings of those 2 buildings along with this thing, we can kind of use that as a barometer to see what we should recommend being permitted on that end of Main Street, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. Look at that, Jeff. We're 2 for 2 today.
Brilliant minds.
Let's also just remember that this building and the buildings that we're comparing to on Main Street are 2 completely different materials. This is wood, and we're comparing it to brick and masonry. So you're going to have a form that looks different because of the properties of those materials. You don't go to Boston and see steel skyscrapers made out of wood. We just figured out how to do that with engineering. So just keep that in mind to remember. Is it the form that you like? Is it the material that you like? Why is it so rooted in your memories, and why are you so sentimental about it? Gonna say something else. That's good. So 1-story, 2-story buildings, we should think about utilizing the rooftops. John's talking about essentially creating terraces. A skilled designer could probably be able to create interior courtyards to bring people from off Main Street into the interior in what is now the parking lots. Just things to consider. But also, in the form-based code, is there any mention of material?
Material, no. Material goes into design standards, so we take a next step forward in terms of guidelines and regulations there. But in zoning, there's no prescribed materials to use within.
So essentially, the past 15 minutes of our conversation has essentially been design-based guidelines, or?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Like the past 15 minutes of our conversation talking about setbacks and facades and the different variations of such to like make things more interesting. Isn't that all?
Yes.
Yeah.
So they have design features within the zoning, so setbacks of X linear feet or in depth, and then they do require things like balconies on second floors if you have the windows facing the facade. Bay windows, all that kind of stuff. So you have the nuts and bolts, but it doesn't take it to the next level of the dental or the whatever kind of materials we want to add there. The gargoyles, we don't specify that everyone has to come in with a gargoyle, not yet at least.
And I did like what Jeff said earlier. But the only thing I kind of like clarification on is, do you want consistency? You do not want consistency from one end of Main Street to the end, but you want each block to have its own character.
Yeah.
So like.
Yeah, correct, just like it is now. If you take a walk down Main Street and you really take a walk and pay attention, each block has its own character. Now, this place here, this gray building, that second floor wasn't there. That used to be the Stone Lion. And what else was there, Charlie, besides the Stone Lion?
The Velvet Hammer?
The Velvet Hammer. Yeah, there you go. So that's what was there. They added to all this garbage. So
it's like, at first I thought in my mind, was like, okay, do you want something like Calm Ave on Main Street? No, obviously. But each block is its own character, maybe like a remix, of like, not a remix, but an updated version of what it was.
yeah, so if you next time you're on the east end of Main Street, if you imagine this building without this addition up top, everything is uniform. Everything is uniform. Okay? And if you go down Main Street, you got the post office, which is a brick building across the street, is the old Hanlons and all that stuff. That's all uniform. Then you go down the next block, besides the old Howard Johnson's, which is Fresh Catch, just about everything is uniform.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's what I would like to retain, is the uniqueness of it. But as you saw in the gray building in the front, at the first building that we saw, they ruined it when they put that thing up there. So that's what I would like to do, is kind of keep the uniqueness of each block. Can we, do something, around the edges? Sure. There's stuff with that good engineers, good architects. I mean, they're going to tear down that hotel. They could do something nice there, sure. It's not going to be like this because it wasn't built in 1895 or whenever this stuff was built. So, yeah, but what's existing now is basically what I'm talking about.
So Kathy uses the word coordinated, but I guess in design language it would be like similar vernacular per block. So in the sense that I'm wearing a striped shirt, and so, not striped, but plaid. Similar vernacular is what we're kind of striving for.
Kristen?
The white building, which is really gray, and now we've moved on to our colors. We've got our colors right now. Do you know the total height of this building?
I thought you were going to ask me what the Velvet Hammer was. I do not, but I know it's slightly shorter than the Cascade, so it would probably be, if I want to guess, I would say about 48 to 50 feet in height.
And when you say, so I get my heights straight, 50, say it was 55 feet, I'm just making that up. That's from the cement to the very peak of the roof? would be 55 feet, or is it just where the dormers are would be 55 feet?
Let me get back to you at the next meeting with that, because we define it a little bit differently. So I want to make sure that when I pulled this quote, it was from either the peak or not. I'll get to that specifics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just piggybacking off of what Charlie said is, we're kind of used to this size building being there. None of us really think anything of it other than I and Jeff maybe don't like the look of it. But, we're kind of used to like this height. And the question that I'm struggling with is like, are we saying the Cascade is going to be this height because of the roof of the Cascade to this? And like, what is that going to look like? I mean, really, what's the comparison side to side from peak to, like the roof peak to the roof peak? And then the other concept, based on what everybody is saying, is if we had this gray building here without the added on part that they ruined it with, and that was what was there, and then the project next to it was Cascade, and we put that to 4 feet, I am a no-go on that. I just, I can kind of see them being next to each other because they might be like this. But if they're like this, I kind of see what Jeff is saying. It's like, maybe there's places where four stories would be totally appropriate. And then we look at 3 or 6 blocks down and we're like, that's not a good idea to allow that by right. So, I think it gets kind of complicated that we have these little subsections of Main Street, but we've made the whole thing open to form-based code without any kind of the concept of how that might impact some smaller building. And then you have the edges, and that's a whole nother conversation. It blends itself out, and it kind of all becomes the same idea. It's like, how much confusion are we willing to live with, and what's the sacrifice of that to the people that already live there, the people that will live there? And then we haven't even gone into the parking aspect of how that does and how much that changes and how much water we need and fire and all those other things. So, I'm more feeling like we should be bringing it back so that we're not making an error that we can't, people look back and say that was the dumbest thing they did, and look at how it's impacted our community in a way that we didn't anticipate.
I'm going to open up public comment. Let Mr. Schwab, he's raised his hand for a while.
I just wanted to encourage you, when you do a review of the site plans, to look along North Street and what's going on there, because Main Street's relatively under control to what's going on North Street. So if you start by, the efficiency apartments that are going up next to the tuxedo shop, the proposed 3, maybe a 4-story replacement of the 7-Eleven, which is, oddly placed. If you look at the Christian Science Church tear down, some of what's going on there, I think you have to look at the impact along Barnstable Road, particularly on Winter Street, one street over. If Barnstable Road goes to 4 stories, what's going to happen to the residential neighborhood, half a block away, right? So in addition to your focus on Main Street, just run through a couple of site plans on North Street and Barnstable Road, and that'll give you a little more balanced perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken, did you have a comment?
I was just wondering when the other picture, we have to keep switching back and forth, but anyway, when was that built? Do you have a sense?
The brick building?
The brick.
I really, to be honest.
Fairly certain it's early 1900s.
Yeah, probably early 1900s, I would imagine, but to be honest with you, I really don't know.
Okay. Because is there any historic designation of any of these buildings along the street?
You'll have to ask Jim that. I'm sure there probably is, but to us who grew up here, they're all historic.
Okay. I get that.
Yeah, and the Main Street is in a historic district, and there is design guidelines associated with that through the Downtown Main Street Waterfront Historic District Commission.
Yeah, I think that addresses one of your questions, Seth. While the zoning doesn't address the materials, I think the high-end zoning, there are, everything from materials and colors and things like that they would have to comply with. So there is.
It makes sense because we didn't really know how to build up until after I became very mass-produced. So imagine like the newest building on Main Street, it was Añejo that uses steel and glass. If Main Street High-End was built in 1980, you would see a lot more higher buildings compared to what we see now, which is a little more historic, just because we did not know what we were doing at the time.
Okay. Well, I think, I'll ask the committee, I think, on the subject of building heights, I think Jim is going to come back with some more information next time. A lot of stuff to think about here. Unless you feel like we should continue this discussion or wait till next one, I would suggest that maybe we think about at least tackling, maybe we do parking next, unless you have any more comments on building heights, and we'll pick that up at the next meeting. Everybody okay with going to parking? Okay, sounds good.
All right. And yeah, certainly don't hesitate to offer more comments, but yeah, there's a number of things I can provide you for the next meeting on that topic.
I'll just mention, just as follow-up to Mr. Schwab's comment, along with maybe 201, maybe we'll look at some of the other projects. I don't know what has been proposed and permitted along some of those North Street or whatever, but if there's something out there that would be helpful, that might be worth it. And just one more thought, Ken's suggestion, I'm certainly happy to have a field trip if people think that we could do something on the 15th if weather permitted. If there's something you wanted to suggest taking a look at, I don't know how others feel, but something to think about. Kathy, I don't think you're going to be able to be here for that, but, I don't know how others feel, but, I think you're right. Boots on the ground, see some of these things, might be helpful.
I don't know if that's necessarily something we do at the meeting, but, if we could set a time to take a look, I don't know what that does to the,
I just want to make sure we
Meeting
don't,
laws,
violate, maybe Kate or Cynthia have any thoughts on that. We want to be careful of any open meeting law violations, too.
If the committee, with a quorum of its members, decides to take a field trip, you can't deliberate or have any discussion. You can just take the walk.
and nod our heads.
No.
Cynthia's the bus driver. Bob, I won't be here on the 15th either. I have a meeting in Boston that afternoon.
Okay.
And then I'll have to post the meeting as well to let the public know that you're, as a quorum, taking a
I'm
walk
happy
on
to
Main
take two at a
Street.
time if
All right, well,
anybody
yeah,
wants to.
we'll give a little more consideration to that, but that's not a bad idea, Ken.
Maybe I'll just take a walk.
Okay, no, I'll go with you. All right, I'm sorry, Jim, we'll go back to
All
you and
right.
parking.
So we'll get into parking this evening. So parking standards here in downtown Hyannis. So the current chart shows minimum parking standards, and it's, there's a lot of things going on here. So basically what it boils down to is one parking space per unit for residential dwelling units. Residential dwelling units. And then there's opportunities for shared parking or reduction of shared parking if you have, say, mixed use. So again, commercial on the bottom floor and residential above, perhaps. So this chart shows, and each one of the, on the right-hand side, the chart shows from the top, you'll see the different colors. Those correlate to the zoning districts, and you just go down those zoning districts and where your property is. So if you're in downtown Main Street, you just follow that column along. And so 0 commercial, 0 cultural services, 0 food and beverage, 3 for office, 1 for residential dwelling unit, 0 for retail sales, and 1.25 for visitor accommodations, so motels, hotels. And in the past, the previous zoning, so I really just highlighted the residential aspect of it, but if you see below, there is, on the left side, sorry, where I circle in red, it talks about the residential dwelling. And what it more or less boils down to, again, here is 1 parking space per bedroom. So parking space requirements for residential dwelling units shall be 1 parking space per bedroom for 1 and 2 bedroom units, or a total of 2 parking spaces for units of 2 or more bedrooms. So you could get away with a 3-bedroom unit, I guess, with 2 parking spaces there. There is also an opportunity through special permit to do off-site parking and reduction of parking if you were able to prove to the planning board that the X amount of parking is unnecessary. So currently, as it stands today, the residential requirements in downtown Main Street and downtown Village, which is, the bulk of it, the bulk of the area is 1 space per dwelling unit. So as I talked about maybe at the last meeting or the one before, the discussion of parking in downtown Hyannis is kind of, in my opinion, twofold. One is the parking that we have today and how we all utilize the spaces that are there right now. The second is what I hear is we don't want to overburden the parking that we have here today and use right now. So we want to be cautious about any new development so that it doesn't do just that. I get that. But I would just want to clarify here, the parking that we have today, so this is in the parking study from right before COVID, 2017, 18. And, we can disregard the peak weekend 6 p.m. utilization. This shows there are a couple locations that are at capacity, mainly the Steamship Authority, and then the balance is way under capacity. Doesn't matter. What I wanted to show you here is that we have over 13,000 parking spaces. We have 1,000 acres of parking. We have almost 758 football fields of parking. Way too much damn parking. And it's just not utilized well. It's not. It's a lot of private entities that want to just hold on to their parking spaces and not utilize it in a better manner. So we'll give, for instance, on the left, the most left portion of this map, that is the, what is it now, the Irish Village, and they have shared parking. They share their parking with the Melody Tent because the Melody Tent doesn't really have much parking, and they share the parking. They made it work. It's interesting during events, but they made it work, and they share the ability to park in that area. I believe the West End might also jump in on that action there. Similarly, the town has North Street parking lot, South Street parking lot, Town Hall parking lot. We allow for all entities to utilize those spaces as well. And then we have a lot of other private entities, offices that go home at 5 o'clock that don't really, or just lay vacant. Talk about a sidewalk, walk around right now. I guarantee you there's 12,000 empty parking spaces. Which is, again, 700 football fields of empty parking spaces in downtown Hyannis. That's shameful. When we talk about tree canopy and heat, concerns, that's this. That's all the pavement that we see there today. And so that, I state this because I'm very passionate about the fact that we don't want to overburden, I agree with you, we don't want to overburden downtown Hyannis with future development that would impact parking for those individuals that are looking for parking. But where we stand today, we have way too much parking. So when I say this, all I offer is that when we think about changing that parking ratio, we think about it in a collective effort of what is being developed here and what's the practicality of what's being developed and how they could utilize their spaces on site, and maybe there's an opportunity for some shared parking. I'm not here to argue for one space per unit by any means. I'm simply saying I would hope that we don't go too far in the other direction that we add to the football fields of parking. With that, I'll note again the permitted developments that have been completed. Many of them have stuck to the one space per unit for the most part. And, I think there is a logical discussion to be had about whether or not that's truly sufficient. We have 201 Main Street who's offered a little bit of extra parking. But by and large, most every development that's come forward has sought to be pretty close to one space per unit, if not exactly one space per unit. I'm happy to bring, when we do site plans, maybe that's a good opportunity to show the parking ratios there as well, and we could have a discussion about that.
Kristen?
How long does it, going back to the study?
Yep.
That was done, and you said 2017?
Yes.
How much time does it take to do a parking study?
I believe they were out there all summer at varied times.
All right. Like, what's the methodology to gather this data, I guess is what I'm,
Traffic engineers literally count.
like, we pay a consultant.
Correct.
How much does it cost to do a traffic study?
I'm not certain. I haven't done one in a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not doubting I mean, maybe the method is flawed, I don't know, but also, here we are, Barnstable, its population grew massively during COVID. I'm just wondering if the data we're using, and I know what you're saying is, maybe you would say even in the face of an increase of growth in our town, we still have enough, but I guess the question is our town has grown a lot since 2017. Do we even know if that data is reliable data? And I'm just going to go back to my previous comment. What I'm struggling to understand is we're putting in 350 some odd units. We're going to have 350 extra cars. Let's just say we're going to have maybe 550 extra cars because there's going to be people that own more than one car that are living in these buildings. And if there is enough and the system is got private and public ownership, it's like the whole system sounds broken, then how can we fix the system rather than, maybe it's not the zoning that needs the fixing, maybe it's the system behind it, I think is what you're saying. So what are our options for either making sure that we have X amount of lots? I mean, it's kind of like the trailer conversation or work vehicles, where will they go? Well, where will all these people be parking when they're gonna park their car during the day and it's near an office building and they need their parking for office building? And I guess it's just like, it's very kind of out in the ethers there about how we really could actually use all 1,000 acres and 700 football fields of parking. We need a system for that, and we need to plan for that if we're going to have more growth, and especially if we're going to have even more growth than that, whether it's at 3 stories or 4 stories. We need to really have a plan for that, and maybe that's the problem. We have no plan for that. We've allowed the developers to develop what works for their budget, but we haven't thought about the impact of how we're going to end up living with the end result of that, and we didn't plan for that. And there's a disconnect between how we are and how we're going to be. We need to narrow that gap and make it known and comfortable and kind of mapped out, because that's the only way we're going to know if we have enough. I mean, it's kind of like water resources. We're planning for a certain amount of water and a certain amount of sewerage, and we have a plan for that. We didn't just say, that's why we went to 2-acre zoning, was we didn't think we could do that. So I guess it's kind of the same concept here, is what can we do and how can we make it work with what we have?
Jeff, go ahead.
Actually, I have a question for Seth, since you're the young guy on here. Oh. And we're assuming that a lot of this housing is going to be taken up by workforce, younger people. What does your generation do with driving? Because I know that my kids were in no hurry to get their license. They were very lazy about it, and all their friends were the same way.
The most expensive places to live in this country are places where you don't need to drive. The most expensive cities in this country are cities where you do not need to drive. They are the most walkable cities. The most expensive. Because living there is so valuable, you don't need a car. That is another expense that you do not need to spend.
So,
and on top of that, kids, I would say younger than me, are getting their license later.
yeah. So my question to you is that, say there's a 400-unit building.
Yes.
Say 275 are 25 and under, or 30 and under. Obviously, you don't know what it would be, but a percentage of how many of those would you think wouldn't have vehicles? And I'm only asking you this because I'm ignorant about it. I don't know enough about that with your generation, so I don't understand.
That completely depends on what they do for work and where the work is.
Yeah. Well, they're here. I can't say what they're going to do for work, but they're here living on Main Street. I mean, do you think 10% won't have cars? Just by the people that you know, anecdotally. Like I can look at my friends and say, okay, 5 out of 7 have cars, 6 out of 10 have cars or whatever. Just from what you know anecdotally from your students, I'm just trying to get a grasp of what we're going to need for parking, because I know a lot of people don't have cars anymore. I know a lot of people use Uber and Lyft or public transportation, which we never had before. 20 years ago, we didn't have public transportation here. So a lot of people use that now, so that's why I'm trying to kind of gauge what your opinion is on the parking situation, because you would know more than us.
I'd say that answer is completely stratified based on your own income. My friends that are less educated, they don't have as much money, they're a lot more or less likely to have a car than those who have the money, funds, and resources to do so. And I will say from my own personal experience from having gone to high school here and having taught in Barnstable, your best performing students are more likely to leave and never come back.
Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Seth is a good example of, he's a teacher. We want teachers in our new residential facilities. How did you get here, Seth?
How did I get here?
Did you drive?
I did. However, I do live with my parents, which is why I can do so. My friends, I do not have that privilege, cannot. And because I also live in Hyannis, that gives me options to do so. Personally, I have taken a lot of cost-cutting measures to be able to do what I do. And my own siblings and cousins, it is a flip side of that coin where, okay, I'm willing to pay the premium of paying maybe upwards of 3/4 of my income to be able to live in a place like Boston or New York or Washington, D.C.
Wow.
The idea of retirement, that's a very older generation for us. We are living more so in the sense of, can I afford to pay rent? Can I afford to pay my bills? And then if I have anything left over, well, I'll make some savings for the future for some kind of contingency plan. And I would say, even when I say that, to think about, okay, am I comparing the people that I went to Virginia Tech with, or am I comparing the people that I grew up here with? Because those are two very different universes, financially speaking.
Well, I want to give a plug to the Massachusetts Teachers Association, so I'd say just stick with teaching and retire. You'll have a nice retirement program.
But I will say, in terms of even teacher recruitment, it's difficult to even recruit teachers here on Cape because it's just that expensive to live here when salaries are when not the salaries, but the cost of living is
Right.
comparable to Boston.
Yeah.
So if you're paying as much in rent here as you would in, say, Somerville, and do we have the same amenities as Somerville does? Is it as attractive as Somerville? You're just like a T right away from downtown, Southie, those places. Can we attract that kind of talent? And that's just people with degrees. How are we attracting the engineers? But back here with parking, it's not just the lack of spaces, but it's when you have minimum parking standards, you force the developers to make a decision of, okay, how much space am I going to dedicate to a car that might exist versus another unit? Am I going to make more profit giving space to a car that I'm not going to profit off of, or a person that's going to pay rent monthly? And then the renter on the opposite side has to think, okay, so am I going to be living in a place where I'm going to need to spend an additional $1,200 a month for insurance, the car payment, gas, maintenance? Or could I take that money and put it towards a place that might be a little bit more attractive to live? Which then feeds into why rent prices are more higher in, say, Boston, New York, and all the other cities. So there's always a ecological point of view to look at this, a more rational point of view financially, but also just purely what are we using this space for a car or a person? Like, what are we going to prioritize? Can we design our zoning laws in a way that disincentivize or makes Hyannis and Barnstable less car dependent, so you're not completely screwed if you do not own a vehicle here? Just something to consider.
I'm just going to jump in, address a thought Kristen had there in your comments, Jim. I think looking at the parking that we have, like you said, you can look at that and the surface say we got plenty of parking. It's kind of like the housing issue. I know a former housing director said we've got plenty of housing in Barnstable, but it's just not utilized correctly. I suspect a lot of that's the same case with the parking. If I lived on Main Street, I'm not going to want to walk down to the Irish Village to park my car, you know? So it's where is it located? The areas that are highly utilized are the ones down by the harbor, and that's where the boats are, and that's why they're there. So we have a lot of that. Plus, you know, this is outdated. It's 2017, like you pointed out, Kristen. It may be something different. But as things get built, some of those parking spaces are going to go away too, right? Because they're going to build on those, so that's going to shrink the amount of parking. I agree, Jim and I had some conversations about this. I don't think we want to go back to one spot per bedroom, but you have some of these properties, I don't know that they've considered like, well, these properties have visitors. If you have 150 people or 300 people, I don't think that's been taken into consideration. You have one per unit, and you have 300 units, and some of those are 2 bedrooms, and then you have people with visitors. So I think, in my mind, where we need to be thinking is going back to, and I know fractional parking spots, kind of hard to get your head around, but you know, maybe the answer is not one, and it's not one per bedroom, but maybe it's 1.5 or something like that. That takes into consideration you're going to have some visitors, you're going to have parking that may not be, you may have excess parking, but it's not conveniently located, and you build something that's still not going to be used. You know, unless we can come up with a plan that allows us to somehow better utilize the parking that we have. I think we need to think about, you know, making a recommendation to at least increase, you know, from 1 to, I don't know what that answer is, but I guess I would toss that out as something to think about. So for that, I'm sorry, Kristen, you think you're going to make a comment?
I'm just curious, Seth, in your experience, so your friends that are less educated who maybe don't have the finances to own a car, what kind of jobs do they have that they, or how do they get to work? You know, if they do not have a car, what's their, like, because Uber and Lyft is super expensive, so that wouldn't be a great kind of
It's either a
concept.
family shared car or with a partner.
Okay, so if they're a share car, that's like how many people would be sharing a car?
Maybe 2 or 3.
And I'm just going to go back to my concept that, and actually it speaks to what Jeff was saying about commercial, is like, you know, what other commercial things would we need in these areas to allow non-car living that doesn't require an Uber or a Lyft, because that's expensive, you know, that they can do what they need in these areas? And is there some way that we're thinking about asking developers to come to be thinking about adding, you know, a small grocery store that's, you know, not fast food, that has enough that a family could, you know, a young couple starting out that are living together in a 1-bedroom and they don't own a car, maybe they have one car that, you know, he can walk to the store and pick up, you know, what's needed for groceries. And, you know, I mean, I know that, you know, your age group is much more like into Uber Eats and stuff, it seems. But, you know, on the same hand, there might be people who can't afford that. So they're economizing, so they're buying things on sale and they're cooking their meals, or they're doing meal prep and those things. So it's like, what are the other things we need in this area? It's kind of like Kathy's saying about planning the streetscape. It's like planning this community to be a walkable community is not just put housing on it with nothing else, because, you know, housing is supported by all the things around it and the services that are needed to live in that area, especially if we're going to assume that people aren't going to own cars or want to own cars. It's, you know.
Even down to shopping and groceries, current trends now, we live more through subscriptions. You pay a subscription to get your groceries delivered to you. You pay maybe Amazon or Temu to get your clothes delivered to you. Everything's very much online, even down to the way that people are now trying to make money now these days. It's I had a lesson last year teaching my kids how to say like different professions in Spanish, or what they want to do in college in Spanish. I was like, let me like kind of change it up. I asked them blankly, if you only cared about money, like what would you do? They tell them their answers. I tell them different professions in Spanish, but one of the most common trends I saw was kids wanted to become streamers, YouTubers. And I can see why, but it's through this committee, whatever we do for planning, we have to structure it in a way that the generation after myself and after me, after my grandchildren, whatever, they have the bones and the flexibility to design this place that fits their society. Like, I love how you and Jeff were talking about Main Street and how sentimental you were about like how it was back in the 80s. And it's beautiful to say that from a 2025 perspective, 2024 perspective. But 30 years from now, when we look back on the past to today, what are we going to say? Well, what new design do we put in here to really create our own identity? Or did we just did nothing for the past 50 years?
And I would say to the point of parking and as it relates to uses, I would say of all of Barnstable, this location would be the most prime for at least a lesser number of parking spaces due to the fact that it has nearly everything in terms of your day-to-day needs. Yes, doesn't have a grocery store. We do talk to grocery stores. I actually talk to a lot of grocery stores because we have like 6 of them now or something like that in town. And they continually say, you need more year-round population over there. That's bottom line. But in terms of, the town, I mean, we do have an urgent care. My wife works at it quite often over at the hospital. We have like 6 pharmacies right here. It has all your basic needs. But yes, grocery store is definitely on the top of the list of, man, I would love to get one down this way. So I would say, again, that's why, to the chairman's point, I had mentioned to him, as you could probably tell by earlier in my comments, stress that maybe we should, consider maybe not going back to the extremes because we're really going to end up with a lot of paved surface when the plan for maybe some slightly shared parking could be achieved through a slight reduction in parking. So you're right, in terms of, let's say there's 100 units being proposed, and they only put 100 or maybe slightly more parking spaces. We need to make up that delta. We need to make up 100 spaces. So, that's sizable. So maybe that won't be achieved through shared parking with one of these parking lots that is not being fully occupied. I talked to most of the private parking lot owners this summer. None of them hit capacity except for the one right across the street from the Steamship Authority. None of them put out their full at capacity signs this summer. So, I mean, there's certainly opportunities for some, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's not that one-to-one. Maybe to the chairman's point, maybe it's a 1.5 or something to that effect. That's just food for thought, though.
Yeah, I'm not even saying that there's not enough parking. I'm just saying maybe we really need a thoughtful plan in this whole area. If there's really 13,000 parking spaces.
Most of them are private, though, so that's why we got to
But that's what I'm saying
urge
is
the
like,
private
like,
owners.
what is that going to really look like in reality of how, it's kind of like the trailer thing. We want to get the trailers out of people's driveways and we want to put them in other areas. Well, what's the solution for that? So it's like we have all these potential cars, or maybe not. Maybe we end up with less cars than we think, and we're worried about nothing. But the question is what happens if we didn't worry about it and then we don't have enough parking? So how can we use our parking system that we have, which doesn't sound systematic to me? It sounds kind of just whatever happened and showed up here, just kind of showed up here. How can we really make that well-utilized and a well-oiled machine that is going to support this development as we have it? And if there is future development, that it can support that as well, whether it's 3 stories or 4 stories. I just think they interrelate, and to think that they don't would be where the angst is for people that want to not have this area overpopulated with cars and not be able to park here to go out to dinner or park here to take a walk and get an ice cream and those kinds of things, so.
I'm just going to comment, Jim, I think you make a good point about, a lot of that being private. I know my daughter and her husband, when they first got married, lived in the North End, and there was no parking. They had to go park in a parking structure. They finally moved because, they got tired of living in a shoebox. But their parking was 25% of their rent or more, and I do have a concern with that, if we're talking about, we want it to be more affordable, younger people, the cost you've been describing, Seth, if people move into these apartments and then suddenly they got another, $750 a month cost for parking because they've got 2 cars and there's only 1 spot for them, that's an issue or concern I have too, so. Is to make sure that, like you said, Jim, how do we get some of these private parking spot owners to find affordable parking or whatever? I don't know, the town's not going to start buying parking lots or whatever, but just another issue you have with not having a lack of parking is then you're introducing a new lack of affordability for the people living there because then they got to go out and pay for parking on top of their rent already, so. Jeff?
Just really quick. Let's not forget that the parking that was done around Main Street was at a time when there was 12 clubs, shopping, hotels, and residences on Main Street. We don't have that issue anymore. That's why they sit vacant. You can go to Main Street any night of the week and find parking. We go out to dinner. Doesn't matter if it's at 7 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, we find parking. So I think that we have to think of it in terms of not what we think it may be, but what it is. And what it is we have parking spaces available all the time. Like I said, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do 1.5 or anything like that, but I'm just saying that we have to think of it in a holistic approach of how we got all these parking spots in the first place. We don't drive the tourism like we did. We don't drive like we used to. We don't drive the downtown tourism like we used to, and downtown doesn't get the foot traffic like it used to. That's why we have all these parking spots. That's why you can go to Main Street, like I said, any night of the week, in the head of the summer, and you can find parking. And you can usually find parking on Main Street. We never have an issue. Once in a while, we have to park behind, the town lot on North Street. Once in a great while. But we usually find it in front of whatever restaurant or wherever we're going. We usually find it in that immediate vicinity. So when we think about parking and we think about the modern transportation system we have here on the Cape, which we didn't have when we were younger, everybody had to drive. Now there's B-buses all over the place, and on top of it, like Kristen said, it's expensive, but on top of Uber, Lyft, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's going to be as big as an issue as we think it may be, because we have the spaces. And the younger generation is a lot more walkable. They're a lot more amenable to public transportation than we ever were, because when we were younger, you had to drive here. There was no B-buses, unless you hitchhiked, and we all did it starting at 14. So that's really it. And, this younger generation like to ride their bikes and, do all that stuff. So I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I'm not saying, Bob, that you're wrong by the 1.5, spaces, but I'm just saying that I don't think the parking's really going to be an issue, just because of the way society is today.
Yeah, I would just say, hopefully, though, through all this, not just our efforts, but what's being done, we are going to bring back that foot traffic that's disappeared. So we have to keep that in mind, too. This is a little bit of a chess match. We're looking a couple of moves ahead. If these things come to fruition and they accomplish what the objectives are, we don't want to find ourselves in a situation, because once that's built, we're not going to make parking spots out of nothing. So we have to keep that in mind as well, too. So, Kristen?
Just because I don't live in this area, and I guess the times have come, I've parked where I think I know I can park. If a person was to live at 307 Main, and it's a young couple, and she drives a Corolla, and he drives a pickup truck because he's a laborer, and she's going to get the spot at 307 Main, and he has to take his truck off-site. If he wanted to park for free, because he doesn't have the money to be able to afford parking, it's another expense, where would he, nearby to 307, be able to park his truck? Say he comes home at 6 o'clock at night and he leaves the next day at 7 in the morning, and on the weekends, maybe they go in the Corolla because it's more, efficient on gas or something, or it's close to where they're living, they don't have to walk to get it. Where would that truck live
For free?
for free?
Nowhere.
Nowhere?
Nowhere.
Okay, just,
Yeah.
I wasn't,
Sorry.
like, I wasn't sure if that's what you said.
No, to be blunt, to be perfectly
Yeah.
honest, if someone's coming in to a development, a new apartment complex, and the entity has said, you have one parking space, excuse me, that's your space. If you would like to find another space, either the property owner could maybe work out a deal with a private entity to provide extra spaces for likely a cost for the tenant, or the tenant could go find private parking. I mean, we have a lot of paid parking in the area, none for free that I'm aware of, but a lot of paid parking in the area. So yeah, absolutely. If you had 2 spaces, there is no free overnight parking anywhere in the general area.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, perhaps we should think about, we shouldn't be building all this density. We're sitting here talking about this parking issue because of a decision was made to go back to just 1 space per unit, and now it's a problem for us all, and we're sitting here discussing it because we have 307 and 201 or whatever. They're going by, they're leaving us with a problem because they're only giving us 1 parking space per unit. I thought we wanted to bring teachers and cops and firemen into these places. That's what we were fed by the developer. They were telling us that. But what cop is going to have a family with 1 car? If they're going to have a family, cars are here to stay. I live in Hyannis. There's no way I'm going to walk a quarter of a mile to get to my car. That requires a super organized kind of person, and human beings aren't that organized. We have to rush off. We're late for things. We're in a hurry, and walking a quarter of a mile down Main Street in the heat or the rain or the snow or something like that, it's just going to get old fast, and so we need to maybe build more density in the areas where there is parking, instead of places like 307 and or either that or just 307 should have been 3 floors and 1.5 parking spaces. They might have been able to fit everybody in there with that, and we wouldn't be here discussing this issue, because if we leave it at 1, it's going to be a problem.
Thank you, Charlie. I think you've just kind of highlighted what some of the interplay between the height limits and the parking, and I don't think we're going to answer these questions today, but I think we've made a lot of progress and start bringing some of these issues to the surface. I think, as we approach 5:30 here, we got a couple things. I want to get everybody home here on a Friday too. I would suggest that we give some more thought to these issues, the heights, the parking. Jim, you're going to provide us with some more information next time, particularly on some of the height information as well as some site plans. So I guess I would suggest, we think about these issues between now and the next meeting. We haven't gotten to the district boundaries, but I think it's probably a little bit too much to bite off to chew at 5:30 on Friday. But does that make sense to the committee to, pick up on those 2 issues with some information, and hopefully we can get into the district boundaries next time?
I won't be here on the 15th,
Okay.
but I can catch up, because I'd like to be here for that, but I won't be here.
Okay, well, when we get to think, talking to Jim, when we get to the point there, we start having some specific things that we want to say, we'll caucus amongst the committee and in public before we make a decision on any of the final recommendations, so there'll be plenty of chance to do that. So I guess I would be thinking for the next meeting, we'll revisit these two issues, hopefully touch on district boundaries, and then you've raised another point, Charlie, about affordability, and that's one of the things that's come up, and this is probably something broader than just the downtown the downtown zoning, and I know the other groups are talking about it. I heard from Rick Presby on the housing. I've been to the LCP meetings, but there's been a lot of talk about, the inclusionary percentage being 10, looking at maybe increasing that to something higher, whether that's 20 or 25. If we're going to build these units anywhere, we need to think about, do we want to be increasing that? So we're really obtaining the goal that we set out to, which is to have affordable housing. We don't want to just have all these things built and then all turn into luxury units. And we're always going to be behind the eight ball if we continue to do that. So maybe we pencil that in as something as a future topic too, Jim. I don't know that we'll get to that next week, but if that makes sense with folks, we would kind of close this conversation on these two topics and move those for the next one. Make sense? Yep. Everybody? Okay.
Should we call it quits and put this off to the next meeting?
Yeah, I think we'll continue these conversations on both these issues, and then, yes, at the next meeting, yeah. Okay. So just a couple things to confirm. Our next meeting I mentioned would be November 15th. It sounds like Kathy and Jeff won't be here, but does it look okay for everybody else? So we'll have a quorum? Looks like that, okay. While we're thinking about it, I think we talked about last time we'd have one meeting in December with the holidays. Looking at the calendar, Friday, December 6th and Friday, December 13th are the two dates that I would toss out. We'd have to ask Cynthia to confirm with IT, but does either one of those work for a majority of the people or everybody?
13th,
13th?
that would be great.
The 13th? Does the 13th work for everybody?
I can't make the 13th.
Oh, bummer.
That's all right.
Okay.
I can make the 6th, but if other people can't make it, so it's all right.
Wouldn't be my favorite choice.
Crow,
But-
going to a Christmas party. That's-
But-
that's when we
But
start
could
the
you make the
celebration.
6th?
No,
Oh, you-
I could. It wouldn't be my favorite choice. Because that means I have 5 meetings, 5 days in a row that week. Yeah, it's too many, but I'll come. It's, if that's a preferred date for a quorum, I'm happy to.
Well, I think we can get a quorum on either one, so just show of hands, who can make the 6th?
I think.
Okay, you think? How about the 13th? All right, let's go with the 13th. John, we'll make you watch it on video. Okay, all right. 3:30. So Cynthia, if I could ask you just to confirm the 13th with IT? Okay, thank you. Item G would be to approve the minutes from the meeting of October 18th.
So
Do we have a
moved.
motion? So moved. Second?
Second.
All in favor? So approved. And then I think we'll ask for a meeting to adjourn, or a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn?
All in favor? Great. Thank you, everybody.